Sonic Channel comics. Cream asks Sonic what his favorite course is, and he talks about the loop, corkscrew, and wall run. How does he think that's what she meant by course? It's weird that she even said course. She should have said area, because it's not like he runs around track fields. Aside from the novelty of him having a friend conversation with Cream, I'm bored already. I like that its passion for speed reminds me of how Sonic was in the earliest Archie comics. Gallagher got the character more than you'd think. But he's never attacked when going down the slope from the corkscrew. So why did he say that? I'm actually glad there's stuff for me to nitpick here. I thought it'd be boring and pointless to review these because there would be no sloppy writing. Cream compares the experience to a water slide, and Sonic reveals that he's afraid of water even over in Japan's interpretation of the character. I've read a game purist saying that the Sonic Channel comics have got to be canon because they're Sega comics from Japan, even though there's no way to get them physically. So it's silly that game purists also say Sonic's not aquaphobic. Let's see how many other times they prove they're not canon and make me wonder why they think only they're allowed to be different from the games, while any other adaptation doing it ruins it. Even if they define different from the games as they have something to offer the games don't. In the next story, Tails wonders if someone's been watching him because he magically knows about that. It makes as much sense as him being able to fly. His first line is stilted because he says as if. King Boom Boo goes behind him, and it turns out he approached him to make him fix a broken hourglass that the ghosts care about for no explained reason. Explaining why they're obsessed with this thing would have made a story all by itself, as well as explaining why they even know Tails can fix things. It has to be that at least one of them died very recently and was aware of Tails' reputation. So it's interesting to see him help them. He confuses me by thinking that's the second time the ghosts, as if they made him help them before. The story ends with the ghosts being nice enough to give him presents as a thank you. But most of the presents look creepy, so this must just be a prank of theirs. I don't get why they'd punish him for helping them. You'd think it'd feel better for them if they punished Eggman. If they can get to anyone's house they want, like there's no limit on how far they can go. Come to think of it, it'd make more sense for them to punish Knuckles, since he fought them. In the next story, Knuckles bores me by recapping to me. He concludes that the Knuckles clan deserved to die for abusing power, surprisingly with only one line that implies he wishes he weren't the last Echidna. By destroying everything, he has to mean just the clan, so that's weird. A fruit falls on him, and a band-aid appears on his head magically just because it's an anime comic, which means injuries aren't as dangerous in this world. He destroys the tree, and his ancestors saw it for no logical reason. But at least it gives them some depth, explaining that they value fruit-bearing trees. And I guess magic from them is why Knuckles knows he made a mistake. In the next story, Amy's fortune makes her expect someone at her house, so she decides to make cookies for him. She wonders if the oven's damaged, explaining why there's a fire. How is the oven damaged? You can have the same oven in your house for decades, and it's still not gonna damage itself to make it like this. Sonic instantly saves her with no explanation for why it happens to be in the area. And the joke is that because of this, she forgets about the fire. In the next story, Eggman decides to talk to the audience about his robots. I guess the reason Orbot has that text bubble is because he wants to say something but is holding back in case he doesn't mean them. How does he think his badniks get the job done if they've never killed his enemies? It's sad that Metal Sonic is a pinnacle of his creations because he never got the job done either. He just looks the coolest and has the best powers. Why is he bragging about robots that are long gone? He doesn't make E-Series robots anymore. I know this because he mentions the egg pawns, and all I can compliment about them is a confusing cost performance. How are they the cheapest if he has to make batteries for them? Animals are easy to come by and free. The only reason for him giving them up is collecting them from a place attracts Sonic's attention because somehow he always finds out. And because he's fast, it wouldn't matter if he did it from many places far away from each other. So he'd quickly put a stop to it. He would have won in Sonic 1 if he had focused on getting the emeralds and not attracted Sonic's attention. And eventually Eggman says he made Orbot and Cubot to kill some time. It makes sense because he doesn't need them, which is evidenced by them only being a recent addition. In the next story, it's weird that Maria says Shadow's going to be born. It's just a metaphor. She decides to call him Shadow, and I like that Gerald's smart enough to realize that it sounds evil. It seems unlike him to talk so informally that he says Guy, though. She says it's a good name because a shadow shows the way to the light. She must have just come up with this, but it's such a deep thing to come up with right away. I find it implausible that anyone would think Shadow is a good name for a good guy. And the rest of the comic wastes time until Shadow happens to drive towards the moon on a motorcycle he's faster than. It should be explained that he uses it when his legs are sore. It can't be seriously implying Shadow is remembering that, because he had his eyes closed at the time. In the next story, Rouge is looking for classified info when Charmy buzzes, even though he never does that, and somehow crashes into her because he was somehow dumb enough to have his eyes closed. But that doesn't explain why someone with their eyes open crashed into someone. Rouge gets thanked for a job, only for the guy to realize he was handed his picture book. Somehow Rouge thinks of Charmy as just that kid, even though they both met each other twice in Generations and Heroes. In the next story, Omega's shooting robots. You'd think he'd have gotten bored of saying that after all of this time. Some Chow are grateful for it, and I like his response. Somehow one of the Chow thinks that a proud combat robot would want a flower necklace for his head. If they're smart enough to make flower necklaces, maybe they shouldn't be considered mere pets. He thinks there's a logical error in his thinking, so he's uncharacteristically appreciating this. Somehow Rouge is dumb enough to make fun of him, so he tries to shoot at her. The only way he would have missed would be if he aimed below her and he was just trying to scare her, despite saying he's eliminating her. He's either impossibly stupid and uncharacteristically evil, or not. I never appreciate when they have character breaking humor by lazily making them too stupid. This is what Pontiac and Grapwitz complained about for in Generations. In the next story, it takes the lazy route because Big's wondering where Froggy is, even though he'd feel the weight of him on his head and he'd immediately want to find out what it's about. He sees his reflection in the water and somehow thinks he can find him by jumping into the lake. This is only funny if you still find Patrick Star funny. I find this a little amusing, but it's still impossible. Game peers love to whine about comic writers going with fandom misconceptions to actually appeal to most of their fans. So it would be hypocritical if they weren't annoyed with this, because I can't remember a single time he was stupid in SA1. He even knew nobody would save him because no one knew he was somewhere. The only reason I think of him as stupid is because he is stupid in Sonic Chronicles, and that game is dismissed as non-canon anyways. And he's stupid in the reboot in SEC Online. In the next story, the narration says that Cream understands the Chow's feelings. I don't see what's impressive about that because I can't see if he has a facial expression that make it obvious, so I assume he does. And in the next panel we see his tears, so he probably did. Why give her credit for that? And since when does she hang out with multiple normal-looking baby Chow? It makes sense that she'd want to be in a Chow garden more than any other Sonic character. She finds out a doll got damaged for no reason. Like Chow are capable of that. Why does the doll look creepy? Who would sell a doll like that or give it to a Chow? She gets upset because they're upset, and Vanilla appreciates her compassion. And it turns out she can fix dolls. In the next story, Vector wonders who ate his pudding instead of just assuming Charmy did it. showing that he wants to be careful and thorough. But then it turns out he looked in the wrong place for it and it was never missing. And then the story ends with them getting beaten up by his so-called friends. They shouldn't blame him for doubting Charmy. This is worse than how all of the canon writers portrayed them. Why doesn't the comic show him getting hurt? Him somehow forgetting he put the pudding in the freezer is there to have a joke, but slapstick would also be a joke. If you're not allowed to show it, you shouldn't be allowed to write it. If it's written so we'll find it satisfying because he got what he deserved, how are we supposed to find it satisfying if we can't see him? The next story has Espio try to see what life would be like if he was invisible all the time. It makes him more relatable. He respects that Cream's watering the flowers and gets sprayed and forgives her. Amy tries to hit him because she psychically felt like there was something invisible there. Then why wouldn't she assume it was Espio? It's a world full of people with magical powers for no reason, and the games never proved she couldn't do this. If anything, there's some weak evidence for it because in 06 she says, "I feel it. Sonic was here." Espio stands on a high place, and Tails' plane flies near it, and somehow he decided to fly that low, risking flying into the pole for no reason. So Espio gets hit by something that was made for flying really high. This was a charming story, but most of it's hard to believe. If it weren't for that part, it worked because it's comedy that feels in place for the series. In the next story, Charmy reveals he's a prankster to his friends out of nowhere, which is certainly different from him being able to get guilted into giving something back to a thief. His friends don't show up, so he tries to get the cake while not thinking to untie his arm, so he's trapped. And why can't he just push the trap over to go under it? How did he even get this trap? He must have stolen it from Knuckles. In the next story, Tails asks Silver to tell him a story about the future. This is relatable. Usually everyone treats him like he isn't from the future. Surprisingly, he agrees to instead of refusing out of paranoia. And he knows he can safely tell him this because it's a story that has nothing to do with the heroes in Eggman. He tells him some boring stuff, and Tails says he came to Pumpkin Hill to find something. A meteorite starts falling from the sky. Silver stops it, and then he reaches his limit, even though that's not how it is in the games. He can hold something above him for as long as he wants. Canon, yeah, right. Tails catches them as the meteorite falls on the pumpkin, and Silver is endearingly easily amused, which would have helped him in his future. In the next story, Blaze refuses to light wood on fire for Marine because she's completely selfish apparently. I would expect her to gladly agree to it because she's a hero. Out of nowhere, she's flattered on her looks when she uses fire, and somehow it makes her annoyed when she wouldn't be used to being complimented on her powers when thereby she was always alone. Out of nowhere, we see Amy saying she wants to see Blaze being cute while she's blushing for no reason, and in the same pose as she'd be if she was thinking about Sonic. At first I overlooked this because Maureen just called Blaze beautiful too. I figured it was done because she likes cute things because it's Japan. But it's not about being literally cute because Blaze was just called a beauty. So this has to be the moment where fans speculated she has a crush on Blaze in this comic. Which only makes sense to me because SCC Online revealed she was raising a kid with a girl in the future. One correction though, it doesn't mean she's being portrayed as a lesbian. It's more likely that she's bi. Because there's no proof she doesn't like Sonic 2, because she did in an earlier Sonic Channel comic. So it doesn't necessarily contradict her character. And I wouldn't just assume she doesn't like Sonic in this issue because that's a big part of her character. Thankfully, Blaze gets flattered into using her fire powers. This is a lot nicer than Knuckles being mistreated into agreeing to play baseball. He should have been flattered into it instead. How nice of her friends to go to the Soul Dimension just to visit her. You never see that in the comics, so I didn't think of that. I guess I just assumed they'd be too busy. In the next story, Blaze wonders what Eggman Nega's doing here. There's some very boring recap like they expected the audience not to know about him. It looks cool when there's some yellow ring-shaped light around him and he warps away. He goes up to Eggman when he's sleeping and scribbles all over him. We weren't given the impression he'd do something minor before, but it does make sense that he'd be petty when he was already petty enough to want to destroy the world or turn it into a card. He flies away with a jetpack, and Cubot can't help but laugh, as I'm wondering why they're letting Eggman Nega be used here and not in the other comics. I think especially picky people would still complain that they're not portraying him like the game's counterpart of him. But the games never stated that he was above something minor like this. I think it would have felt better if it was the other way around. In the next story, Orbot looks up data about the robots before him because somehow he thinks he has to avoid being reconstructed, when they already served their purpose fine. It would have been better not to have him say this. Then it could make sense because people like to look up their ancestors. After a boring recap, Orbot says he tried to look up unfortunate, and somehow he brought up an article about Zeta that didn't have the word unfortunate. Why does Eggman even bother keeping files on robots he doesn't have anymore? His fate scared them into being especially nice to Eggman. Orbot should explain that he thinks if they went to work for Tails, Eggman would send something to destroy them or capture them that'd find them no matter what. And Eggman's smart enough to be suspicious at the unexpected cake. The next story is about Styx when she's supposed to be a Sonic Boom character. So now her being referenced in Sonic Frontiers makes sense. They were perfectly willing to imagine that there was a games version of Styx too, and we just didn't get to see her. She says she hates the TV, so why is she alone in someone else's house? Or did someone just buy her a TV? Why does she say everyone when she's alone? And she accuses the commercial of trying to brainwash her, and ends up getting that exact thing to eat. It turns out she's in Tails' house, and he's not wearing goggles. Why would Game Tails be friends with someone so crazy who hasn't proven her usefulness? He can make a ray gun, so he doesn't need her boomerang. But it was still interesting to see her again. In the next story, Jet starts splitting the treasure equally with his gang, saying half even though there's 3 people here. And he acts completely out of character by giving Wave his share of the money, even though one of his most defining moments is daydreaming about being rich. And Wave's out of character by saying she can't accept his share of the treasure, despite being completely selfish and remorseless in the games, as Tails can attest. Jet says he only wants the thrills of adventure and racing, and he can't order from a vending machine. So Wave gives him a coin. Oh, what was that about you're not allowed to depict money in Sonic? Because you can't be giving him gold, or the vending machine wouldn't accept it. Looks like this isn't canon then, because the Team Sonic racing animation was going to depict Big's wallet and wasn't allowed to. So either Sega pays no attention to these comic books on their own website, or the Team Sonic racing video is more canon than them. Or maybe it's that you're not allowed to show money, it's a more recent thing. In the next story, Jet praises Wave, and she says naturally, and he responds by saying Sonic's his equal. A confusing response because she didn't talk about Sonic. She says equals are just idiots, and somehow he doesn't take that as her calling him an idiot, which is the only way it makes sense. She waits for him to leave before celebrating, and Storm proves he's dumber than Big the Cat by asking what she's doing for no reason when she's talking to herself, which embarrasses her. The next story is boring because I've already seen Storm airboarding a lot. He gets upset because he didn't get to the free buffet in time. Why is it run by Omochao? Unemployment rates would be sky high if this was a world where people hired Omochao for free instead of normal people. Why does Omochao keep being used when they've known he was hated since he first appeared? Speaking of that, he gets a story to himself where all he does is annoy Sonic endlessly like it's a fan parody, or Lego Dimensions. In the actual game, Omochao didn't give you more advice. He just gave you advice and then left you alone until he found another one. No wonder there's multiple Omochao there. It makes even less sense that someone would make more than one. The story ends with Sonic telling a bunch of Omochao to shut up. Or maybe it's only one. And that's part of why I hate art that depicts stuff that isn't really there. It takes you out of it. What a waste. Why would they make a story about Omochao without explaining who made him and why? This is the laziest way to make a story about him. I'm sure it's been done too many times to be seen as funny. Why does he think Sonic has to be careful because of spicy food? The next story has a Dark Chao in a fight send another Chao flying without the impact being shown. And somehow the Dark Chao regrets it. But that's immediately puts an end when fruit falls and they all share it. If you're gonna forgo logic by having the evil Chao regret, it'd be better to have him climb up and get the fruit for him. How are a hero, dark, and neutral Chao all in one place? There's only one tree, and it doesn't bear hero or dark fruit. And no villain would go to a Chao garden like this to pet Chao. In the next story, Tikal tells some Chao to play hide and seek with her. And as soon as I saw the water, I assumed it was chaos. She didn't though, and was surprised to learn it happened. If Tikal can be out and about like Chaos in Sonic Battle, why did she never show up again? Why didn't she go to Sonic's birthday? Speaking of not being canon, this doesn't seem like a way that canon Tikal would act. I picture her reading a book, and it's lucky that she became easily amused enough to play a kid's game when she was portrayed as mature enough to be against greed and war earlier. It's either she appreciates doing this or feels unfulfilled. So she could have changed in all that time. But playing little kids games isn't going to stop you from feeling unfulfilled. In the next story, Cubot's being ignored by Metal Sonic while trying to make friends with him, because he's only interested in Sonic, highlighting how he's as one-dimensional and boring as a badnik. Cubot gets a terrible disguise as Sonic that wouldn't fool anyone. How did he think that was good enough? How did he have that the second he needed it? Metal Sonic uses his power against him even though he'd recognized his voice. This would only make sense if he was punishing him for reminding him of Sonic and acting like an annoying little brother. But he doesn't have free will anymore. Why would his programming allow him to attack one of Eggman's robots in something other than self-defense? Why does Eggman think they're getting along when Cubot's saying help me and Metal Sonic's boosting? If he's boosting, how's Cubot outrunning him by just floating? Cubot and Orbot weren't built to chase Sonic, so why would Eggman go through the extra effort of making them faster than Metal Sonic? It's almost like these comics aren't canon. I guess I can accept that he made them that way to account for his temper so he wouldn't have to rebuild them. The only reason Cubot would bother trying to make friends with him is if he was only recently built. The next comic bores me with the Sonic characters being aware that they're in a comic in a long-running franchise somehow. Eggman almost kills them with missiles, and I have to wonder how he missed when they didn't know he was there. I guess he missed on purpose because if he hit just one of them with a missile, they'd instantly die instead of getting scared of him first. Cream's dialogue is lame. The story ends without the impact being shown when cheese is thrown at the Eggmobile. And it says see you soon. Is that really all there is? Well, these comics never made me laugh. There is the occasional story that's unusually charming for a Sonic story because they're going for humor. And sometimes it's the right kind of humor instead of idiot balls. They don't take themselves too seriously, so there's no plot point I hate that takes forever to get resolved to have an arc just for the sake of it. So the fact that they're episodic is one of the best things about them. These comics have sloppy writing at times, but they're a better experience than IDW, Sonic Boom, Sonic X, and videos like Sonic Mania Adventures, because they don't generate boredom all the time like TV episodes do, and they do stuff that's new, unlike Mania Adventures. The pacing's generally good because it's one page for every issue. I hate that the coloring is so lazy, but I think we wouldn't get them at all otherwise, because then it'd be more work to make them. And at that point, why not sell them?